Okay, so we should get started. Distinguished guests, colleagues and representatives, I am pleased to welcome you to this side event on blasphemy laws and their human rights impact across Asia. At GHRD, we work on the protection of minority rights, freedom of religion or belief, and accountability for human rights violations. This discussion reflects those priorities. In several countries, blasphemy and religious offense prohibitions are being applied in ways that raise serious concerns under international human rights law. Although states are bound to protect freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and expression, these laws are often enforced in discriminatory or disproportionate ways. Allegations, sometimes based on weak evidence, or personal disputes, can result in arbitrary detentions, severe criminal penalties, mob violence, forced displacement, and impunity. Those most effective include religious minorities such as Ahmadis, Hindus, and Christians in Pakistan, the Baha'i community in Iran, women and girls in Afghanistan facing restrictive religious interpretations, and minority activists targeted under broadly defined religious offense provisions. Today, we will examine how these laws are misused in their gender impact and discuss ways for human engagement and legal reform in time. Special rapporteur for minority issues. We are honored to have you here with us. Your mandate is particularly relevant to this discussion because blasphemy laws are often affect religious and religious minorities in a disproportionate manner. Your engagement with state minority protection provides an important lens through which to assess such laws align or fail to align with international human rights standards. Yeah.
Thank you very much. First, thank you very much for the invitation. Much appreciated. And yes, this is a very concerning issue for many persons belonging to minorities. Blasphemy laws are very often used to discriminate against these persons. I will give a very general overview of what the UN is which, as you know, still exists in more than 100 countries on Earth. So blasphemy laws are often portrayed as arbitrary tension between freedom of religion and freedom of expression. Let me remind you that freedom of religion and belief is an individual freedom of right. And as you know, it's exactly the same. And so freedom, you have it, and the state did not intervene to prevent usually the right you can claim. You can ask for your right to be recognized and to be protected by the state. So actually, as regards freedom of religion and belief, it sounds like a freedom, but if you read Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is dealing with freedom of religion and belief, it reads, I quote, everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right shall include freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of his choice, and freedom, either individually or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. And so it doesn't have much. It's a right to freedom. It's a strange wording, but what is important is that it is an individual right. It's not a right given to religions. It's a right given to individual to freely choose to believe or not to believe, and if they want, they choose to believe, to freely choose which faith, which religious expression they want to believe. So very clearly, freedom of religion and belief does not give a right to religion as such to be protected by law. Quite on the contrary. In legal terms, the issue of blasphemy law is most of the time perceived as an interplay between paragraph 1 of this article 18 that I've just quoted and paragraph 3 of the same article, which states, and I quote again, freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary to protect public safety, order, health, or morals, or the fundamental rights and freedom of others. End of quote. So we see that it is possible to limit this freedom of religion and belief, but the grounds on which it is allowed are very limited. And we will see that blasphemy law do not fit into this allowed limitation. Sometimes also, some countries rely on Article 20, paragraph 2 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is more general and which says, I quote again, any advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence shall be prohibited by law. So you can imagine that you can try to fit blasphemy law under that broad authorization. However, on this very issue, the Human Rights Committee monitoring this international covenant has been very clear in its general comment about Article 18, general comment number 34, which states, and I quote again, prohibitions of displays of lack of respect for a religion or other belief system, including blasphemy laws, are incompatible with the covenant except in specific circumstances envisaged in Article 20, paragraph 2, that we just quote, of the covenant. Such prohibition must also comply with the strict requirements of the series of the article, and they continue, thus, for instance, it would be impermissible for any such laws to discriminate in favor of or against one or certain religions or belief system, or the adherents of another, or religious believers over non-believers, nor would it be permissible for such prohibition to be used to prevent or punish criticism of religious leaders or commentary on religious doctrine and tenets of faith. Very clear. And the Human Rights Committee is considered, when it gives a general comment, to give kind of an authentic interpretation of the content of one article, in this case Article 18. So no doubt, blasphemy laws are banned by international human rights law. Notwithstanding, the fact is that there are still 105 states that have blasphemy legal provision. And in 7 of them, blasphemy may lead to death sentence. In 79 others, to a potential prison sentence. And there are 19 countries where such provisions are still present but not implemented. However, I want to warn you, all of us, that we can see the president of a great democratic state which revives statutes or laws from the 19th or 18th century to pursue some that he qualified as opponents. So we need, in the current time, to be very careful with the concept of dead letter law. It is forbidden. It should disappear. Working on this question, the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights has convened in 2011 a series of expert meetings which led to the adoption in 2012 of the, I quote, Rabat Plan of Action on the Prohibition of Advocacy of National, Racial, or Religious Hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence. And this was presented by the High Commissioner to the Human Rights Council at the 23rd session. And this plan clearly states, I quote again, at the national level, blasphemy laws are counterproductive since they may result in de facto censure of all interreligious or belief and intra-religious or belief dialogue, debate and criticism, most of which could be constructive, healthy and needed. In addition, many blasphemy laws afford different levels of protection to different religions and are often proved to be applied in a discriminatory manner. There are numerous examples of persecution of religious minorities or dissenters, but also of atheists and non-theists, as a result of legislation on what constitutes religious offense or of a zealous application of laws containing apparently neutral language. Moreover, the right to freedom of religion or belief as enshrined in the relevant international legal standard does not include the right to have a religion or belief that is free from criticism or ridicule. Quite clear. And going further, the plan of action underlines, I quote again, it is of concern that perpetrators of incidents which indeed reach the threshold of Article 20 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, remember, we quoted at the beginning. So, actually, it is a matter of concern because those which commit such acts are not prosecuted and punished. At the same time, members of minorities are de facto persecuted with a chilling effect on others through the abuse of vague domestic legislation, jurisprudence, and policies. This dichotomy of, on the one side, non-prosecution of, in quote, real incitement cases, and on the other, persecution of minorities under the guise of domestic incitement laws seems to be pervasive. So again, I think the language is very clear. It's not my language. It's a language that comes from this expert meeting and this Rabat plan of action, which was presented to the Human Rights Council. So, much more generally, this Rabat plan of action states, and I quote again, it is often purported that freedom of expression and freedom of religions or belief are in a tense relationship or even contradictory. In reality, they are mutually dependent and reinforcing. The freedom to exercise or not to exercise one's religion or belief cannot exist if the freedom of expression is not respected, as free public discourse depends on respect for the diversity of conviction which people may have. Likewise, freedom of expression is essential to creating an environment in which constructive discussion about religious matters could be held. Indeed, free and critical thinking in open debate is the soundest way to probe whether religious interpretation adhere to or distort the original values that underpin religious belief. Following the Rabat plan of action, several meetings with religious and faith leaders were organized by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, leading to the adoption in 2017 to the Beirut Declaration on Faith for Rights. This Faith for Rights platform still meets annually, working further on these issues. And also, it's not only blasphemy law, but it is included in the work. So to conclude, blasphemy laws are still much too frequent. Many efforts, such as those in the Faith for Rights platform, are still needed. But it is a multi-stakeholder and multi-level effort that can improve the situation of religious minorities. Legal scholarship and UN human rights mechanisms provide clear answers on the illegality of blasphemy laws. We however realize that all states, and there are numerous, that still have blasphemy laws, consider it as a highly sensitive political issue. This is why activists need to remain present and strong. It is positive that some religious and faith leaders seem ready to work constructively on interfaith dialogue for promoting the respect of human rights. And it is such coalition that is needed to have the situation evolving in a positive way. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lepra, for your insights. It was really clarifying, especially from a legal perspective. It is always necessary. And now we're going to turn to our next speaker, Simin Ahmadis. She's a representative of the Baha'i International Community's United Nations office in Geneva since 2011. Her work focuses primarily on human rights, peace, and freedom of religion or beliefs, and the rights of minorities. She has served as a Baha'i International Community delegate to various commissions on the status of women, the Commission on Sustainable Development, and the Permanent Forum of Indigenous Communities. She has also collaborated with organizations such as Amnesty International, Noble Women Initiative, and the Center for Defenders of Human Rights. Simin will be speaking about the overall persecution of the community in Iran, focusing on its manifestation in Iranian laws and policies. She will explain the concept of scapegoating of the Baha'i community in Iran during moments of crisis in the country, such as the recent protests, and the forced televised confessions of Baha'is that emerged as a result.
es muy grave.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me because I'm using the other microphone? Great. Thank you so much for convening this discussion. For Iran, this is actually quite an urgent discussion given everything that's been going on in the past weeks. Of course, they're not maybe necessarily connected to blasphemy directly, but it is about imposing a certain ideology, a certain interpretation of religion and politicizing it and imposing it on an entire community without their will. Blasphemy laws are actually often presented as instruments to protect religion, but in practice, in many contexts, we've seen that they actually protect political power instead, and they are used to silence religious minorities. Blasphemy provisions, as was shared by a special rapporteur, frequently contradict international guarantees of freedom of religion or belief, and rather than safeguarding these rights, that these blasphemy frameworks often erode them, especially when vague language enables discriminatory enforcement. The debates around blasphemy laws, freedom of expression, and incitement to hatred are complex and have been ongoing for many years and decades at the international and national levels. States, of course, have legitimate obligations to prevent incitement to hatred and violence, but when religious offense provisions are vague and selectively enforced, they cease to protect a religion and begin to weaponize it. In Iran, the case of the Baha'i community illustrates how this weaponization works, not only through penal provisions, but through an entire architecture of discrimination that criminalizes belief itself. In Iran, the Baha'is are, the treatment of the Baha'is is influenced by blasphemy and its broader applications in various ways. For those of you who may not be familiar with the situation of the Baha'is in Iran, the Baha'is are the largest religious minority in Iran, the largest non-Muslim religious minority. Of course, Iran is an Islamic state, Shia Islamic state. The Sunnis are the largest minority. They're still a Muslim minority, but the Baha'i community is the largest non-Muslim religious minority in the country that has been persecuted systematically by the government since 1979. And we see the impact of blasphemy and its broader applications in three ways. Firstly, through government laws and policies. Although the Baha'is are the largest religious minority, they are still not recognized in the constitution. So the Iranian constitution actually officially recognizes only Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism. And the Baha'i faith is intentionally excluded. And when they are not recognized, Baha'is therefore do not benefit from constitutional protections afforded to recognized minorities. And you hear sometimes when the Iranian government, even at the UN and international levels, tries to defend its treatment of the Baha'is, often refers to the fact that the Baha'is are not a recognized religious minority. In 1983, Baha'i administrative institutions were completely banned after members of 3 national Baha'i councils were either executed or abducted and disappeared. In 1991, a confidential state memorandum, which was approved and actually directed by the Iran's supreme leader himself, Ali Khamenei, and the president at the time, set out a very clear policy, which was, and here I'm quoting from this government memorandum, which says, Baha'is should be treated in such a way that the progress and development is blocked. This document became known as the Baha'i Question document. It actually came to light by a special rapporteur at the time, even though it was confidential, but it was found and was brought to light internationally. It directed authorities to expel Baha'i students from universities and all Baha'is from public employment. Instructions were also sent across the country that Baha'i children should be placed in schools with imposing religious ideologies, essentially to distance them from their faith. In 2008, a letter from the Ministry of Science and Technology instructed universities across the country to expel all Baha'i students. And this is essentially how exclusion becomes institutionalized. At the same time, the penal code provides enforced mechanisms. The Islamic penal code in Iran actually authorizes legal compensation for murder, such as blood money to a family should their family members become victims of murder, but only to Muslims and people of the book. thus denying the Baha'is even the right to compensation if they were victims of murder, and so legally, essentially, encouraging crimes against Baha'is with impunity. And we have actually kind of a more recent case where a Baha'i was brutally murdered in his car, Mr. Ayatollah Rizvani, and for being a member of the Baha'i community, and they were actually found the murderer and established that it was intentional. And after about 11 years of the family going to courts to seek justice for their family member, the court ruled that Mr. Rizvani's family would not receive legal compensation, stating in the court document that it's because the victim was a Baha'i. And new amendments to the Penal Code also reinforced these discriminations. Article 500, which is a new amendment, actually states that any deviant educational or proselytizing activity by members of so-called sects that contradict or interfere with the sacred law of Islam should be criminalized. So the wording is intentionally vague and the scope is broad, meaning that in practice, even the most ordinary expressions of faith can be reframed as criminal conduct. The second way the Baha'is have been impacted by blasphemy laws and their interpretation has been through numerous religious fatwas and rulings, which characterize Baha'is as religiously impure, unclean, untouchables, and which actually outright bans association for Baha'is because they are not people of the book. And so when a state-sanctioned religious narrative labels an entire community as impure, it legitimizes exclusion, it isolates them socially, it fosters stigmas in the workplace, schools, and in neighborhoods. And thirdly, through state media and coordinated hate propaganda, which essentially further reinforce law and religious rhetoric. State television and official state media outlets for the past 4.5 decades have disseminated ongoing disinformation portraying Baha'is as agents, deviants, threat to Islam, and national security. And each year we have thousands and thousands of pieces of hate propaganda which labels Baha'is as enemies or as to religious piety, and thus essentially justifying persecution against them. And if I may just speak a bit about these recent weeks and these recent events and their impact on the Baha'i community, in each moment of national crisis in Iran, the machinery of hate against the Baha'is intensifies. And during essentially every moment of national crisis, whether it's social, political, or economic, the Iranian authorities have consistently and systematically scapegoated the Baha'is in Iran through false accusations and allegations and a coordinated system of disinformation and campaigns. And this time has not been different. Since the protests, programs have been broadcast on state television spreading false accusations against the Baha'is, including 2 forced confessions by 2 Baha'is in Iran, where these 2 young people, they're in their early 20s, they were brought on state television after being heavily pushed and coerced into doing this to essentially confess falsely that they were involved in the protests and instigating the protests, and also connecting them to violence. And this is the scapegoating of the Baha'i community is not new. As I said, it's been happening for over 4 decades, but this is an escalation in scapegoating where we have seen that after a few decades that now Baha'is, these 2 Baha'is have been brought to forcibly confess under coercion. Of course, these efforts by the Iranian government to stigmatize the Baha'i community in Iran has not worked, neither nationally nor internationally. Iranians in Iran have realized that the Baha'is have been persecuted solely because of their religious beliefs, that the only intention and the only reason behind these persecutions has been religiously motivated discrimination. And this has been the case also internationally. The former Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief actually said that the persecution of the Baha'is in Iran is one of the most extreme forms of religious intolerance in the world today, and that Baha'is face persecution from cradle to grave. The former Special Rapporteur on Iran characterized the persecution of the Baha'is in Iran as having taken place with genocidal intent. And more recently, the Human Rights Watch actually determined that the persecution of the Baha'is in Iran is considered a crime against humanity, a persecution. So Iran may have criminalized Baha'i identity and belief, but it has only tarnished its own reputation internationally. The Baha'is in Iran have only sought what international law guarantees to all, the right to believe as individuals and in community with others. Protecting that right is a basic human right, and protecting the freedom of religion or belief means ensuring that every person, without exception, can live, believe, and contribute to society in dignity and without fear. Thank you.
That was really interesting to me. Many thanks for your remarks. Now I'm pleased to give the floor to Farid Ahmad, National Secretary for External Affairs of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in the UK since 2007. He has a particular focus on international human rights and freedom of religion issues. He's a regular speaker in parliamentary meetings and hearings in the UK, and the European Union and the UN. And he has been part of a parliamentary freedom of religions and belief international delegation to assess the state of this matter for minorities. He also serves as a board member for the Voice of Islam Radio and has served on the editorial board of the Review of Religions magazine. Mr. Ahmad will be speaking on the systematic persecution of the Ahmadiyya in Pakistan, in particular how the strict blasphemy laws and other provisions of the criminal code are used to target and silence Ahmadiyya Muslims. Thank you for your.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak on this really important issue, which is the issue of blasphemy that target religious communities for their peaceful beliefs. And this is quite critical, that they target beliefs that are personal and peaceful, yet still targeted harshly. I will speak about South Asia, primarily on Pakistan, but also on Bangladesh. But perhaps just want to say that when we speak as a community, we speak out of love and respect for the country because we want to see progress. We speak as loyal citizens because we want to see progress in those countries. And in Pakistan in particular, its first foreign minister was Sir Mohammad Zafrullah Khan, who was the permanent representative to the UN from Pakistan, to this very institution. The first Nobel laureate was also a member of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Professor Abdus Salam. And similarly, in the armed forces, civil service, many people serve the country with distinction. But loyalty to one's country also means speaking for the betterment, and in that spirit, these remarks are offered. In many countries, including Pakistan, and many communities, the blasphemy laws target religious minorities. But the case of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is unique. And it's unique because it's the only community that's explicitly targeted by laws. Let me explain. In 1974, the constitution of the country was amended to explicitly declare Ahmadis as non-Muslims, and that law still stands. In 1984, the criminal laws of the country, the penal code, made it a criminal offence for an Ahmadi to call themselves Muslim or to practice their Islamic faith. Or even Ahmadis have been arrested for writing Quranic prayers on invitation cards. That faces 3 years imprisonment. These laws still stand on the books. They also prohibit an Ahmadi from posing as a Muslim. That law still stands. But the persecution, as is the case of the Baha'is in Iran, this persecution is from the cradle to the grave. And when an Ahmadi is born in Pakistan, they cannot register as a Muslim. When they go to school, they cannot attend and register as a Muslim and are targeted by hate material in the syllabus and textbooks. When they apply for an ID card or a passport, they cannot apply as a Muslim. And all Muslims that do apply must sign a declaration declaring Ahmadis to be non-Muslim and their founder to be an imposter. Ahmadis have even been arrested for having a Muslim name. And if any of these are targeted under the blasphemy laws or wider provisions, these are punishable by the death penalty. And the death penalty carries such minimal thresholds that it's quite shocking. A mere allegation is enough to convict and imprison people. And it's not just whilst they're alive. The persecution is literally cradle to grave. When an Ahmadi dies, his grave is in danger of being desecrated by extremists for bearing Quranic prayers or bearing a Muslim name. And many have experienced this, sadly, throughout life and in death. And these laws and the application of their laws are perhaps unique in the world in their totality and their ferocity. In schools, I mentioned, children are targeted because of the syllabus, but not only that, our own schools were nationalised, so we can't teach our own children, and those schools, despite meeting all conditions, have not been returned to us. We cannot teach our children about their own faith. Our publications are banned, and now the amendments to the cyber laws in Pakistan have made it a criminal offence for us to have our websites online, our social media accounts online. So where do you teach your own children about their own faith? The cyber laws are effectively blasphemy laws by the back door. Beyond religious rights, Ahmadi Muslims are also denied civic rights, and perhaps most fundamental of all is the denial of the right to vote. In Pakistan, an Ahmadi cannot vote as a Muslim, and they're put on a separate non-Muslim list, and the only way to come off that list is to deny your faith, as I mentioned earlier, and sign declarations that you deny the founder of your community, or say that you are not a Muslim. And all these rules and laws still stand and are clear denial of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the ICCPR. And the situation has worsened over recent years. For example, in 2025, just last year, 3 Ahmadis were killed for their faith, another died in custody. Since 2023, over 50 mosques have been targeted, minarets have been torn down. Since 2021, more than 400 graves have been desecrated. And in 2025, shockingly, 250 Ahmadis were charged under blasphemy laws, had cases registered against them. And 175 of those were simply for offering prayers, arrested for praying. That gives a sense of the nature and scope of persecution in the country. But I wanted to focus on one particular case because I think it's unique in the way the law has been applied. In December, the judgment against Mr. Mubarak Sani, who was sentenced for life imprisonment, is quite shocking under the blasphemy laws. He is a humble, devoted man, originally arrested in January 2023 for an act that they claim took place in 2019. And that act and that allegation was completely false. It wasn't a crime then, and it should never have been a crime. He was charged with distributing a copy of the Holy Quran to his students. That act broke no laws, and it became a crime to distribute that Quran only 2 years after. So he was tried and convicted for a crime that was not even on the statute books. And yet he spent a year in prison before the Supreme Court threw that case out. But the backlash and the mobs took to the street. The Chief Justice had a bounty on his head, and religious scholars rather than lawyers were given access to the Chief Justice to lobby on the case. And it's shocking that that case went back to the lower courts, and the judgment was one of more anti-Ahmadi rhetoric than legal justification or laws. And just to give you a flavour of that, the judge in her decision said that Mr. Sani had used the Holy Quran in a derogatory manner, yet no evidence was presented whatsoever. And there can never be any evidence, because Mr. Mubarak Sani loved the Quran so much that he memorized it. He would never be in a position to say anything contrary to the Quran. Yet, in December 2025, in a judgment based on prejudice, he was moved to give life imprisonment, and we plead for his early release in that case. He now joins 5 other prisoners of conscience in Pakistan who languish in jails on false charges of blasphemy. That's Pakistan. I also want to touch on Bangladesh. Blasphemy laws do not respect boundaries and political boundaries, and we've seen how that has spilled over into other countries. And in Bangladesh, Ahmadis have also been targeted by violence and extremism. Ahmadis have been killed, their property has been targeted, burnt and attacked, and Ahmadis have even been murdered for their faith. During last November's mass rally in Dhaka, a mass call was made by clerics to declare Ahmadis non-Muslim in Bangladesh, as has been done in Pakistan. Thankfully, the new Prime Minister, spoke up for freedom of religion during the election campaign, and so far has upheld the secular constitution of the country. And we pray that he upholds that principle going forward as well. The truth is that the upholding of freedom of religion is the key to success. His Holiness Hazrat Mirza Masroor, the worldwide head of our community, has said, in reality, religious freedom is what can create peace in society. And it's so true, because discriminatory blasphemy laws bring no peace. There's no peace to the family of 47-year-old Lake Chima, who was brutally beaten to death by a mob in Karachi, leaving his wife and 7 children. No peace for Mr. Mubarak Sami, who's in jail simply for possessing the Quran and memorizing it. No peace for the children of Ahmadi Muslims who have been killed, including 7-year-old Hira Tabassum and 7-month-old Kaina, who died when their house was attacked and burnt to the ground. No peace for the wife and children of 62-year-old Nasir Ahmed, who was stabbed to death at a bus stop in Rabwa for failing to chant slogans in favour of a blasphemy cleric. And no peace for 58-year-old Dr. Sheikh Muhammad Mahmood, a gastroenterologist who was shot and killed outside a hospital in Punjab. There are many such incidents, and hundreds and thousands of people are affected. And in fact, if you look in Pakistan, hundreds and thousands of Ahmadi Muslims suffer day in, day out, wondering if they will be next. So I put it to you that as long as such laws remain, there is no peace, not just for Ahmadi Muslims, but for other minorities, and even for the country at large. The issue of the blasphemy law is not an academic or distant legal debate or a hypothetical construct. It is a brutal weapon of persecution, and they offer no peace at all. We welcome the fact that some action has been taken on extremists in Pakistan, and we hope that that action continues. The sooner such laws and their misapplication are curtailed, the better it is for citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rahman, for your intervention and for sharing these specific cases of how actually blasphemy laws impact the life of individuals in Pakistan. So yeah, thank you for that. And now we will be following with Ina Bella Fornat. She is not participating as a lobbyist or representative of any specific organization or group. She will contribute her perspective as an analyst, speaker, and author, addressing what she considers one of the most fundamental dilemmas of her time. You have the floor.
Thank you, and also thank you to the Special Rapporteur and to both representatives. Your testimonies are very powerful, very necessary, the most important ones of today. As said before, thank you. I'm not speaking here on behalf of any institution or government. I'm speaking here as an analyst, author, and someone who has examined what I believe is one of the defining dilemmas of our time. A dilemma that sits at the intersection of belief, power, and freedom. The dilemma is, how do we protect freedom of religion and belief as a cornerstone of human dignity, while ensuring that a religion itself is not instrumentalized to undermine the very freedoms it is meant to protect? The Special Rapporteur has also spoken about this. It's not an abstract tension, as you heard from both testimonies. It is one that has concrete human consequences, as we have heard from both parties. Blasphemy laws are often framed as tools to preserve social harmony, protect religious sentiments, or prevent unrest. But in practice, in many contexts, they operate very differently. They become mechanisms through which religious minorities are silenced, discriminated, criminalized, or rendered vulnerable to violence. The issue before us is not belief. The issue is coercion. International human rights law is clear. As we heard before, Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights protects freedom of thoughts, conscience, and religion, including the right to adopt a religion, or to change it, or to have none, or to be a free thinker like myself. It protects belief as an internal freedom, and that freedom is absolute. At the same time, freedom of expression, including expression about religion, may only be restricted under strict conditions of legacy, necessity, and proportionality. What we see in the application of blasphemy laws in certain states is unjust, unnecessary, and disproportional. It is the criminalization of identity. It is laws that are vague and selectively enforced. It is accusations used to settle personal disputes. It is entire communities living under permanent threat. It is a chilling effect that silences dissent and debate. And in many cases, it is not courts alone that punish, but mobs, social ostracism, forced displacement, and impunity. The second dimension of this dilemma is more complex and more uncomfortable. Around the world, extremist actors invoke freedom of religion to defend practices or ideologies that contradict fundamental human rights principles. Literalist interpretations of religious texts, often centuries old, are mobilized to justify discrimination against women, minorities, or dissent. Here again, we must be precise. International human rights law protects the right to hold beliefs. It does not protect the right to impose those beliefs through coercion, violence, or discriminatory legislation. The freedom to believe is not the freedom to dominate. And when stated, codify one religious interpretation into law, particularly in ways that target minority communities, they cross the line from protecting belief to enforcing orthodoxy and dominance. The victims of this shift are rarely the majority. They are minorities whose theology differs, whose interpretation differs, and whose very existence challenges a narrow narrative of national identity. We must resist the false binary that is often presented in those debates, that one must choose between protecting religion or protecting human rights. In reality, freedom of religion and belief and minority protection are mutually reinforcing. Pluralism is not the enemy of faith. Accountability is not the enemy of belief. Human rights are not the enemy of religion. The true threat to both religion and human rights is, as said before, coercion, especially when it is sanctioned by law. There is also a third dimension to this discussion, a dimension of governance. When blasphemy laws are embedded in legal systems without safeguards, they undermine judicial independence and rule of law. When accusations alone are sufficient to trigger detention, violence, or exile, due process, the rules ensuring face treatments of individuals collapses. And when the international community hesitates to address these laws out of fear of appearing culturally insensitive, minorities are left without protection. The United Nations has a particular responsibility here. It must continue to affirm that protecting freedom of religion does not mean shielding religious doctrines from scrutiny, nor does it mean legitimizing discriminatory laws. It must support states in reforming legislation that fails to meet international standards. It must support mandate holders who document these patterns. And it must amplify the voices of those directly affected. Finally, I would like to return to something more human. The people we are discussing today are, as you know, no legal abstractions. They are individuals who navigate daily life under threat, sometimes because of what they believe, and sometimes because they refuse to conform, and sometimes simply because they were born into a community deemed different. If blasphemy laws are used to silence minorities, then they are no longer about faith, they are about power. And power without accountability is precisely what human rights law was designed to retain. The challenge before us is not to weaken religion, nor to dismiss cultural context. It is to ensure that no belief system, religious or ideological, becomes a tool for persecution. Our freedom must be protected, and so must those made vulnerable in its name. Thank you.
Thank you for your words and the clarity. We really appreciate you being here and having your viewpoint. And now we will open the floor for questions and remarks. We have approximately 9 minutes, so I would kindly ask the interventions to be concise and indicate please to whom they are addressed. Thanks. Yes, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers, Global Human Rights Defense, for the organization of this very important discussion. I believe many speakers have referred to it. We share the view that both freedom of expression and freedom of religion are interrelated and mutually reinforcing rights, which can only be restricted in very limited circumstances, which were explained by Ms. Korsnack. In addition, my country as a principle stands on the death penalty. We think there are no grounds in law that could justify the use of the death penalty. And I believe it was Mr. Lefranc who mentioned that there are about 105 countries having blasphemy laws. And I was wondering whether you would have a view, just to get an idea of the extent of the problem, in how many of those countries the blasphemy laws contain penalties which include capital punishment. You don't have to mention specific countries, but we usually struggle to get clear data on the death penalty, so we're just interested to see the extent of this phenomenon. Thank you.
Yeah, we can take more questions and we can answer at the end. Okay, you can start answering if you want, and then we can see.
Sure. Thank you, and naturally I share this position which does not allow for any justification for death penalty in whichever circumstances. Actually, from the data I have in text, there are 7 countries in which the blasphemy can lead to death penalty. Now, whether it is strictly implemented or not varies, and it's not always easy to get the data. What I have observed also in some countries is that it is being abused, including naturally by power, but also very often it gives rise to a system of corruption. So basically you get condemnation for low courts to a maximum penalty, sometimes death penalty, and then after years of waiting, the highest court will transform it into a lesser penalty, usually no less than the years that you've been waiting in jail. And in some country, if you can bring money to some judges, maybe things will go faster. So it's not only protecting the power, but actually it is also, in some countries, being misused as a tool of extortion against minorities. I will not be any more specific, and yes, I share your concern about getting precise and specific data. It's one of the great difficulties we have as mandate holder, I mean, all of us.
If there's no more questions, okay, then we can close this session. Thank you all so much for your contributions. It was really interesting, and it's a pleasure to have you here for us. So enjoy again.